Hey guys, today we're going to talk about news, the history and impact of news. So, essentially, which information we'll be covering. A news product is produced to make money, not to inform you. News is primarily visual. Importance is given to stories with video, especially nowadays, more and more is going to video. Technology has made news instant. News outlets race to be first rather than correct. So, news comes immediately without context and frames the world for us, tells us what's going on. So, the news has the ability to define the agenda by leading the attention of an audience to what it believes to be the issues of importance. A brief history of news. News has been around since the beginning of time. Mass media began, though, when Johann Gutenberg invented the printing press in 1440, and that changed the game. In 1605, Johann Carlos published the first weekly newspaper in Strasbourg, Holy Roman Empire, titled The Account of All Distinguished and Commemorable News, aka The Relation. In 1604, the Boston Newsletter was the first major newspaper in the American colonies. And historians claim that Ben Franklin's Pennsylvania Gazette, however, was actually the best colonial newspaper. And Franklin, he was smart enough to sell advertising space in his paper, so it was a very successful paper. Eric Burns credits newspapers for starting, covering, and winning the Revolutionary War. But low literacy rates halted the growth of newspapers till the early 1800s. In the early 1800s, penny papers came out and began to win with serialized stories that from week to week, the same story would just continue week to week. Sensationalism and celebrity news and gossip came into fashion in the early 1800s. Sometimes negative news does come out, but is often exaggerated and manipulated to spread scandal. Pope Francis. The Civil War began the Associated Press, the AP, and this began when six newspapers in New York used the telegraph to report the war. They shared information with one another to cover more ground. So more than 1,400 American newspapers today use the Associated Press. Using AP stories and photos is cheaper, and the problem lies with so many papers heavily relying on it that most news today newspapers come from one source, the AP. The success of penny papers like the New York Sun brought a shift to the news industry from hard news to soft news, like feature stories, like Johnny saved the cat from a tree kind of story. Yellow journalism, the fake news strikes again. So in 1898, newspapers wrote yellow journalism based upon the type of paper written on yellow, and regarded President McKinley's handle of the Cuban situation in Spain. So yellow journalism comes along and exploits, distorts, or exaggerates the news to create sensations and attract readers. Well, it attracted a lot of readers because it helped encourage war with Spain because it blamed the explosion of USS Maine on Spain. Remember the Maine was the rallying cry. And February 15th, 1898, the U.S. battleship Maine exploded, and, well, newspapers picked that up, blamed it on Spain, led us to war with Spain. So fake news led us into war. A great little video about sinking of the Maine here, link in the description. And the newspaper blamed Spain for the explosion. Congress declares war because of the outrage of the people. How dare Spain do such a thing? Well, it turned out Spain really didn't do it. It was kind of just an explosion that happened and wasn't no one really to blame. But the newspapers declared it was Spain's fault, and so Spain's fault it was, and we go to war with Spain because of yellow journalism, because that's the power of the press right there, folks. So in recent years, print newspaper has taken a major hit. Television and the internet. You can get your news anywhere else, and a lot of times people don't even read the newspapers. New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and USA Today remain premier newspapers in the United States. So these are your global newspapers you see at airports, hotels, and stuff. New York Times, Wall Street Journal, USA Today are your premier newspapers, nationally syndicated. Now on to news television. Initially, television networks aired segments 5, 10 minutes, public service, see what's going on in the world. But the news began to be broadcast as a show. Networks began selling advertising time in the news. So NBC had a program called Camel News Caravan. Well, get this. A guy sat around smoking Camel cigarettes telling us the news. Yeah, they give a few of those broadcasters. You can't make this stuff up. And so news was dominated by CBS, NBC, ABC with their nightly news offerings, and it still is today. 5:30 news broadcast. You can go check out the NBC News, CBS News, or ABC News. And then Walter Cronkite, St. Joseph's own, was considered the most trusted man in America. He's worked for CBS, and he's one of those famous. And his most famous, Walter Cronkite's most famous for his announcement of the assassination of JFK. You can watch that video in the link in the description. It's just fascinating. Takes his glasses off, and it's just you see all his emotion, telling us that JFK died. And so Walter Cronkite, he was the most trusted man in America from St. Joseph, Missouri. So today, some 38 minutes ago, seems like forever to get the news. And it's called the CNN effect. Okay, because within 24 hours, we're all used to seeing news live and immediately. And that began in 1980. Ted Turner began CNN and broadcasting news 24 hours a day to cable news network. CNN began in 1980. There was so much time to fill. Cable stations tend to turn to talking heads instead of actual news reports at a desk. Use people, arguing about the issues of the day. Talking heads spewing off a lot of stuff, just their opinion, not really actual news. But it fills time and it gets ratings. So to use opinions, conjecture, and repetition to turn minor stories into huge, major ordeals. And I'm convinced that if we had 10 minutes of news a day instead of 1,440, we'd be better informed, says Julie Smith. Information overload. Author and scholar Neil Postman claims that we are so inundated with information that it's impossible for us to determine if it's valid, meaningful, or true. So we have access to news information 24/7 through TV, the internet, social media, the palm of our hand. We can search what's going on up to the second. And Twitter is very good at that. So sometimes they get false information because news media wants to be first, and so a lot of times it's false. But social media overload, information overload. Oh, a picture is worth 1,000 words. You've heard that said before. So most TV news programs refuse to cover a story without compelling visuals to accompany it. No one wants to hear the guy sitting there talking without actual visuals and pictures accompanying it. So you're more likely to be drawn in by visuals than by words being spoken. So we cannot depend on today's news media to ever tell us the whole story. Well, because there's not enough time, and frankly, our attention span is just not long enough. A good 5-minute story, we're good to go. Anything over that, I'm not really paying attention. So the newscaster moves quickly from story to story to avoid upsetting viewers to the point that they're not going to buy any of the advertising products. Breaking news! Since so many news is seen through social media, traditional news outlets have to rush to compete with social media, especially Twitter. Right? In this hurry, news outlets risk sending out information that may not have been vetted. Well, that's a big no-no. We've talked about that before. And so the news outlets got to be first. So they send information before it's all vetted for accuracy. Stories get retweeted or posted without much fact-checking. And quick may not always be correct, but it is certainly preferred in the news industry. The first one to do it, they get all the accolation. And there's a great tools for verifying online information there. So the main focus, though, is ratings. How many people are watching us? So most news outlets are owned by a very small number of large corporations, like all other media is. Okay, it's all about making money. And so the highest ratings equal more money for advertisers. To increase ratings, they tell us stories we want to hear rather than ones that we need to hear. That's why it's good to hear all sides. Watch Fox and CNN and MSNBC. You get a good, all three of those, you'll get the whole story. In order to keep people watching, news producers are encouraged to sensationalize stories. Exclusive. Limbaugh shatters Obama into a million pieces. Oh, that's just hyperbole. All right, they didn't literally smash a bomb into a million pieces. That'd be really gruesome and crazy. Uh, but hyperbole. It's the storm of the century. Drama. Watch the team come from behind to win the game. Fear. Your child might be a victim of online predators. Tune into 9 at 10 to find out. And news outlets, like every other media source, exist not to inform or educate, but to keep us tuned in so that we can deliver uh, us to the advertiser. It's all about making them money. So, where do you go get your info? It's very important to get news from multiple sources. If you watch Fox News, please let not be the only one. If you watch MSNBC, CNN, please let not be the only place. Get your news from various sources, newspapers, probably some of the best sources to get your nightly news program, uh, your cable news. All these different places are great places to look for and always get a variety of uh, sources. And international news sources see different views, like BBC, Al Jazeera. Okay, they're good sometimes, an outside looking in perspective. And there is money to be made by giving us what we want instead of really what we need. So every news story has a bias and comes from a specific point of view. Take everything you see and hear with a grain of salt. Selective exposure. News consumers get themselves in real trouble when they engage in what media scholars call selective exposure. Viewers choose what news sources they watch to affirm their beliefs. So if you're a conservative, all you watch is Fox News, well, they're going to confirm your beliefs. This must be true. This story must be true, even though chances are it may not be true. Or if you're a liberal and says, I'm going to watch MSNBC and that's all I watch, chances are you're seeing selective exposure. They only see one side of the story. It agrees with you, so you like it and you watch more of it. So we don't like to be proven wrong. It's easier to consume what we already believe. Okay, Fox News is your conservative news, sensationalizes stories to help the conservative point of view. On the other side of the coin, MSNBC is liberal news that sensationalizes stories to help the liberal point of view. CNN falls somewhere in between, but they tend to be more liberal nowadays, especially after Trump bashing them. They've kind of turned more liberal. And if you only watch one, your point of view will be swayed. Get your news from multiple sources. Cannot emphasize that enough. Okay, over 30% of American adults get their news from Facebook. And they find a problem because your friends on Facebook usually tend to think like you, and so they're going to share and like things, even if they're not true, that go to their point of view, and that's all you see. And there's this echo chamber, and everything agrees with you. You're not getting the whole story. So, did you fact check this before you posted it? I don't need to. It agrees with my preconceived views and biases, so it must be true. Yeah, no, don't do that. Right, so importance of media literacy. Media literacy helps you filter the constant stream of information. It helps you understand the messages you're receiving and the motives of the content creators. So discussion questions of news. Which sources of news do you consider most credible and why? Are there stories we think should get more coverage but do not? Have news stories ever misrepresented groups of people or countries? And in what ways can you fact check the news stories? And how does the format of the news change the story? And is it ethical for news to sell ad space? You need to make that decision. So until next time, see you later.